Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Alice Leon Stevens, and I am the founder of Holistic Elevation. Holistic Elevation is a mental health and behavioral health agency that also services for substance use. So, for us tonight, we are going to be increasing our intelligence around understanding PTSD. So as we go through, we understand that we individuals, especially post COVID, there has been an increase in mental health challenges, an increase in overdose, or an increase in behavioral challenges, especially disruptive behaviors. And knowing, understanding what they look like, and better understanding from the different age standpoints as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen that for us to be able to see and understand. So let's go ahead and share that. So when we think of PTSD, what exactly is PTSD? We hear it so often. What exactly is PTSD? Many individuals know that PTSD is post traumatic stress disorder. And this is a mental health condition that actually can be developed after experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event. And that for us is where a person maybe walking down the road and they see something terrible happening. They're able to have nightmares. It may impact them. For some people, they may also forget where they're going. So there will be different symptoms. There will be different triggers that we're talking about. But PTSD is from experiences or witnessing something. Let's see. Now, what exactly is secondhand trauma? Secondhand trauma for many individuals, this is what we call vicarious trauma. So it is where you may not have necessarily been the one that experienced the trauma per se, but it was communicated to you as from someone else. So there are some individuals that come and they're sharing their stories, and you feel as if you're the one that actually going through it. And one of the examples I can give is Katrina. Katrina is one of those hurricanes that caused major, major challenges throughout within New Orleans. But what happened is that it was passed down. The impact of the trauma from Katrina impacted multiple generations. That when you speak to someone, let's say a third generation down, they will be able to share with you the impact, the emotion, the pain that the ancestors went through, but they were not there necessarily. So that can also be from secondhand trauma as well. Excuse me, sorry, because it's causing emotional and psychological distress to the individual who is learning about it. So secondhand trauma is through learned experiences as well. So it is not you that have gone through the trauma, but someone else has, and they're telling you their story. Hmm. Then let us see. What exactly can cause trauma? We hear individual PTSD. We hear individuals talk about the cause and effect. So there's an event that happened, but when we think of PTSD, many times we think of wars, we think of something so severe, we think that a person experienced, but what we want to be able to know about PTSD is that it is not by the measurement. So when we have an individual that is going through something or that have gone through something, many times in society, we want to be able to measure it and say, nah, your impact is not that great, or it's no big deal. One of the examples I give people is, let's say you have a person that was bullied or that was teased at school for one day, and you have a person who went through severe traumatic experience. Let's say they were human trafficked, for example, and one person was bullied and one person was human trafficked. And as a result, many people will come and say, hey, you know what? That person that was human trafficked will have a higher level of PTSD or triggers from the PTSD or their trauma per se. But one of what I tell people is it's not based on the measurement of what we as providers or parents or community members measure to be traumatic. It is how that person processes the event that they have gone through. So if a person was bullied for one day, many times we will ignore that person. But what happens is that that creates negative thoughts, that creates identity challenges. It creates so many, it creates a snowball effect, because that person who was bullied for one day, one time, we would not invest as much. We would not want to be able to figure out what happened, where it happened, how did that make you feel to that extent, or even follow up to make sure that person is doing great. A person who is human trafficked or went through a lot of traumatic experiences that we measure as traumatic experiences, then what will happen is that all the human resources will be poured into that person. The emotional support, the financial support, everything that is needed will be poured into that person, because we measure what trauma is, or that person's responses to that trauma. But it is not based on the measurement from us. It is based on how that person or the individual who's going through the PTSD is responding to it. So remember, it is not by the event itself, but how that person processes it. Because you can have different people that goes through the same trauma or goes through the same challenges, but the coping mechanism is different. The support they have is different. The space in which they have to be able to tell their story is different. And that is one of the responses. So when we're working with individuals, is how do we help them in processing that trauma? And then we spoke about the secondhand trauma. So one of the examples I like giving is COVID. So I have that picture here because during the COVID pandemic, many of us actually, when we were talking about a family member going to the hospital and not coming back, when we talk about the impact of COVID, we were talking about the impact, and we were talking about how it took lives and how it impacted the family, the financial strain, all of that. But one of the groups of individuals that were forgotten was the children. So you will have where parents or adults will say, hey, so and so went to the hospital and they never made it. We're talking and we're conversing about what is happening, but we neglect to recognize that those children are processing what we are saying. To this point, post-COVID, there is an increase in depression, an increase in anxiety, and all the challenges that children are going through. Because when we look at, we provided support and we seek assistance for us as adults, but the children themselves, they went through the traumatic event, but we did not recognize that they were going through it. So we have to be able to recognize that traumatic events, just because we are sharing stories and we are talking about stuff, we also have to be mindful as to how are we impacting the children as well. How are we impacting the ones that are not able to voice or share their feelings or their emotions. So be very mindful, because PTSD is not just going through a traumatic event that we can see within our own eyes. It can be transferred through the conversations that we're having in the presence of other people as well. Or if a person is not able to process the event itself. Now we're going to the causes. So when we think of PTSD, what causes PTSD? We spoke about secondhand, we spoke about experiences, but also let's look at environments. I'm just going to go throughout this list, but let us look at environments. If you live in an environment that has high trauma, let's say high violence, it may have ongoing challenges, then that can also cause PTSD. Because I will use, for example, the city of Wilmington. In the city of Wilmington, in certain areas, not everywhere, I'm not using Wilmington because, but let's say in a high crime area, a child has to walk to school. And in that same area, they witness a loved one being killed, or they hear a lot of gunshots going on and happening. And we know in the city of Wilmington, if you live within a certain mile radius, regardless of what you experience, the violence that's going on in there, children walk to school. So if they are walking to school and they're seeing the shape of a loved one who passed away onto marked onto the road, that can increase PTSD. They don't necessarily have to be able to witness the body being there, but they can still live within an environment that is causing the PTSD. And with that fear, it increases the fear, it increases the anxiety. And for children, anxiety develops first before depression, because they're learning how to regulate the emotions. So the fear, the uncertainty comes in, and that creates anxiety, and through that the depression develops as well. And you also have what we call chronic. So with the chronic, this is where we have our book that was written by me. So when we go in and we look at the chronic component, this is where we want to be able to recognize where it is being repeated. The event is happening over and over and over. You have complex, where a mixture of different things are happening. You also have adverse childhood, where AKA the person is going through so many different levels of social determinants, social challenges, extreme poverty, and as a result, not knowing where you will be sleeping within the night. So when we think of PTSD, we only think of it on a violent standpoint, or we think of it on an extreme standpoint. But little things, what we consider little things, happening over and over and over, where the brain is not resting, it causes a chronic uncertainty that can also build PTSD. Because now, oh my God, I lost my job, and because I lost my job, now I'm gonna have a trigger that I'm gonna be homeless, I'm gonna have difficulty in sleeping, I'm gonna have difficulty in going through, and now all of my childhood memories is developing back. So we need to be able to recognize what are some of the challenges individuals are going through. Then we have intergenerational transference. That was a great example I gave earlier in regards to Katrina, where if a person is going through challenges, it can be previous generations that have gone through it, and they describe it to the current generation, and it is passed on as if they're still going through it. So looking at the various traumatic events, then we have the large scale traumatic incidents. And this one in itself, it is similar to COVID. So one of the examples I like giving people is, let us look at going back to Katrina. When Katrina happened, it happened on a small scale because it only happened within one region. And it had such a great impact. It impacted individuals because they lost their properties, they lost their memories, they lost their sense of identity, because whatever they had was gone. Just imagine you stayed in a community because your loved ones were buried there. And then you had that hurricane that took away everything. It took away your house, it took away your driver's license, it took away everything that you could have connected to you and created your identity. That was gone. So now you have to be able to develop all of that. And remember, it is the emotional and psychological impact, the physical component that impacts you psychologically and emotionally. So now you have COVID. COVID happened on such a large scale. And it did not just happen one time and stop, it was prolonged, which means that the impact from COVID, which will be way greater than the impact from Katrina. And if we do a historical comparison, we will see that certain incidences that have prolonged impact, it impacts generations. So we can just imagine the large scale, the increase in mental health challenges, especially remember it's the processing. If we don't put in place proper processing and the help for us to be able to understand the challenges we have gone through and how we can overcome it or accept it, then it can ripple into other forms because it will change its form. It will not remain the same. Um, so being able to identify that and know those areas is very important. We want to be able to go on and identifying symptoms of PTSD. So with symptoms of PTSD for some individuals, remember, one of the things I always talk about is the symptoms in children will vary from the symptoms in teenagers and will vary from the symptoms in adults and will also vary from the symptoms in women and men. So we want to be able to understand that those symptoms will vary. It will not be the same. In children, for PTSD, yes, children might be wet in the bed because it's some of the common ones, but also there will be where they might have nightmares. Yes, these are some of the common ones, but the behaviors will be changing, and that's where it is different. So a child may end up having anxiety, and with the anxiety, if if the event they have gone through or the mental health is not healed or processed correctly, then what will happen is that that anxiety behavior will be starting to change into depression. It will not, the depressive symptoms will not look that of adults because children are still learning how to be able to process their emotions, understand their emotions, and to be able to communicate about how they feel. They will more likely be able to cry, scream, do all of those things. And especially if a traumatic event is added within that, it creates more emotional distortion. So for individuals, for children who are going through it, many of them will be given oppositional defiant unless the child comes or the parents come and say, hey, this is what the child is going through. But for many individuals or children, especially teenagers who are going through it, we as professionals many times just look at the symptoms. We're like, oh, okay, you're not listening to your parents, you're screaming, you're not following the rules, then this is what you are. You're oppositional defiant. But when we actually start doing a deep dive and it's like, okay, tell me about what you have gone through the past 2 years. And it's like, okay, so and so passed away, which I was close to. Okay, so tell me about the past 5 years. My mother and my father separated. We were not together. My father yelled at my mother and took something, or my mother yelled at my father. And now you're getting the storyline, and the storyline will be able to show you where the traumatic event started and how it manifested within that child that you're seeing at this very moment. And that's where we as professionals need to be able to increase our view, because the diagnosis that individuals have, it's a reflection of the experiences that they have gone through, because diagnosis changes. It does not remain the same. Similar to a person, if they go through and they have they're experiencing a traumatic event, yes, they will have PTSD, but they will also have another diagnosis. So we need to be able to understand those symptoms and why those specific diagnoses are given. Then you have individuals, for children, they might have, with the anxiety, they all may also have separation anxiety. They don't want to go to school. For some children, especially during after the pandemic, a lot of children did not want to go to school. They always have a tummy ache. They literally will be throwing up. They have all the symptoms as if something is wrong with them. But that usually only happens when it's time for them to be separated from their loved ones. Then you have teenagers. For teenagers, when they go through some of their traumatic experiences, yes, they will have a combination of the child symptoms and the adult symptoms, creating an identity conflict symptom. And we need to be able to figure out, this is why also it is high in suicide. With being able, because if the identity crisis is going on and that teenager, let's say from a child, has gone through, they went through COVID, they went through all of those challenges, they went through homelessness, they went through not having enough, they went through bullying, and they did not have the peace of mind to be able to figure out who they are, what they want to become, who can support them, because now the parents have to work 3, 4 jobs to be able to make ends meet. Now they have not created that sense of identity for them. And for some of the teenagers, that's where sometimes cutting comes into play, because it gives that sensation of relief. It's not that they want to be able to end their life, but it creates that relief. Some of them, or some individuals, they have that choking sensation. It's like they're so angry. It's like, and they do not know how to release it. For some people, they have blackouts. It's where they will be talking and it will build so much anger that the emotion is not processing correctly, and the brain becomes overwhelmed. And so they go into that blackout zone. It happens to children, it happens to teenagers, it happens to adults. And some of them cannot remember anything. For some PTSD, this is where they might not remember. They might have split personalities, DID. And the suicide rate is very high, because if the emotions are not able to be regulated correctly, and they want to be able to release that pain and get that pain out, it can lead to suicidal ideation, because it's an internal pain that they're not able to share, because they're not able to express how exactly they're feeling, or what is causing them to feel that way. You also have, we spoke of difficulty concentrating as well. You have individuals, because the brain has been so active for so long, because PTSD, when you go through it, you're not able to get the proper rest that you need. So your brain keeps on going, and it's like it's going, 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 and it cannot stop. So now it's like having difficulty. You stand over here, you go over here, you go there. It looks similar to ADHD or ADD, but the reality is that the brain has not had the opportunity to rest. So now it's creating a new behavior or new practice. You also have major confusions for some people who has emotional stresses as a result of PTSD. You have where the frontal cortex, is causing major headaches, and it is where you feel as if something is so heavy onto your head, and it's like tons of weight on there. It is not a migraine, it is not tension, but it just feels heavy. For some other people, when they have not slept within a while, in a period of time, or they're starting to have delusions, or audio, they're having different psychosis. It's some people get headaches at the back of the head. And one of what I always ask my clients if they come in is, what are the different types of headaches you have? Because based on the different types of headaches my clients tell me that they have, it will tell me their level and the chronic symptoms of their PTSD or their mental health challenges. Because keep in mind, the brain needs to be able to process. And if the brain has not been given the opportunity to process, then over its responses in a protective way. And we don't want it where the brain overreacts, because now it's not getting the rest that it needs. Because when you're on a train track and you're going, 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 and you put something in front of you, you will tumble, and it will cause major impact. And that's why sometimes when people come and they're like, hey, Dr. Alice, I'm trying to sleep, I cannot sleep, I slept for 1 hour, or whatever the case is. I'm like, yes, but that will be a process. We will need to be able to process your sleeping, because if you go, yes, you will be able to sleep, but when you wake up, you will feel lightheaded. You will feel even worse than how you actually went to bed, because you have not gotten all of the rest that your body and your brain actually needs. So this is why for us, part of our alternative processing is for individuals to actually have rest. We actually have one of the rooms, the meditation room, that is designed for it. We also have the meditation room for hot and cold massages within the massage chair, because we understand how trauma, and PTSD impacts the body. Um, so these are some of the symptoms. There's a whole bunch of symptoms. It will vary based on the individuals. You also have for men, if men are not trained in how to be able to share their emotions and talk about the emotions, because one thing in common with everything, it is the emotions. If we are not trained to express our emotions and we hold everything in and then blow up, that can lead to domestic violence. It can lead to so many other areas, because now we're not able to control our emotions. Our anger takes control. We inflict pain. We punch stuff. We cause damage because we are not expressing ourselves within a healthy way. And that's why narration is very important when we're working with individuals with PTSD, because narration helps the brain in reprocessing the traumatic event itself and make turning it from a terrible incident to a survival incident. So changing it from just focusing on the negative, but being able to focus on the event itself, how it impacted the person emotionally, mentally, and what change it has caused, and what that person is hoping to be able to accomplish. So it creates that storyline. And that is one of the ways to be able to help in processing PTSD and trauma. So we spoke a little about the symptoms, how people can develop PTSD. We have the various types as well. We have acute stress disorder, and we know that this is where it is 3 days of a traumatic event up to 1 month. And we have chronic, where it is more than 1 month, but lasts for 6 months. So this is where you have a lot, it goes after the other, it just continues, it does not stop. You lost your, you, for a person, it's like every day, okay, I'm being, let me see an example of the chronic. I will come back to be able to give an example of the chronic, but it's where it's just continuously for 1 month. And then you have the complex, where a person might be, they lost their house. And then after they lost their house, they lost a family member. After they lost their family member, they lost their job. It's like a pile up over a pile up, multiple trauma all happening at the same time. But chronic is where it might be the same thing happening over and over and over, and eventually the person just cannot take it anymore. Delayed onset is where something has happened, and the person responds to it in at least more than 6 months after the event itself has happened. And we have disassociative. So disassociative, we have depersonalization, derealization, but it is also where a person, you can stay here. One of the examples I gave is that you can be sitting here, and then all of a sudden you feel as if you're inside, like your entire being is taken away from your body, and you can see yourself where you are. So you're disassociating yourself from it. So with derealization, but also that's personalization. Derealization is where you're here, but you're able to see, it's like you're outside reality. And then you have where with dissociative identity crisis is where an individual may end up having multiple personality. So let's say many times in childhood, if a person goes through a traumatic event within their childhood, and that traumatic event is so severe, they can lose a gap or forget a gap within their lifespan. So if I ask a client, okay, tell me about your life when you were growing up, they'll say, okay, well, I remember when I was 5 and I was playing and I was going through and doing whatsoever. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, tell me about your life when you were 10. I don't remember. I cannot remember anything about my life when I was 10. So when is the next time you remember? When I was 22, when I got into a relationship, or I did this, or I did that. So now they have a gap within their life that they cannot remember. And it is where it is regardless of what they do, they just cannot remember that part. And it is where for some individuals they have other personalities. So now you have a person who may have an adult who may have a child, and they have the child's voice, they change within the communication. Then you have where that same person can change into an aggressive violent person. But one thing happens is that there is at least one of the identities that does not remember the that can remember the others, but the others do not remember it. So we need to be able to identify that, and that is also one of the areas blackouts can also happen as well. So we need to be able to be mindful. If there are headaches happening at the back of the head after a prolonged or chronic traumatic event, or where the person has not rested, it is important to be able to get the help that is needed. If the front of the head is hurting and it's causing extreme pressure, it is important to be able to get the help to process the emotions. Up here is the emotions. We want to make sure we're processing the emotions correctly. At the back, it is chronic. We need to be able to ensure and double check to see how long or complex as well it's been happening. Um, so we need to be able to get the help that is needed. And then we're going to go into the triggers. Many people, when they think of PTSD and they think of a trauma, one of the major things that we usually ask is like, do you hear anything? Do you see anything? Do you smell? And that are some of the common triggers that people go through. So let's say the person who committed, the perpetrator to your traumatic event, wore a green cap. Now, anyone that passes by you with a green cap, it causes a trigger. Your body and your mind automatically go into protective mode. If your abuser always drank alcohol before they come home to start beating, now anytime you take the smell of the alcohol, it brings back that thought of being abused. So there are different areas that the trigger happen. For some people, not everyone is aware of the triggers that they're going through, because either they have not been taught or have not been enlightened about what exactly are triggers. So please be very mindful of individuals when they're going through it. Also, individuals like for specific tone of voice. Many times I find it with for individuals where the men were the perpetrator, and if a man is passing by and they elevate their voice or speak in a certain way, then it's like, oh my God. And that in itself can cause a trigger for some individuals, the voice itself. For some other people inside, it can be a person being a female. They, as a result of the trauma that they went through, it was caused by women in their lives. So now that can be a trigger for them as well. And then you have environmental triggers. We spoke about being the Wilmington being an example. So just imagine if you are visiting the same place that your trauma happened. That can be a trigger. It does not have to be the exact space, but it might look like the exact space, or encountering the people who actually caused that trigger for you. Then you have where yes, similar to witnessing something, and then now on the news you have the exact trigger, the exact samples that's happening. These are some of the triggers because it's suddenly happening. You do not know how to control it, and it kind of like shakes you. Many people have the internal triggers where they have the intrusive thoughts, they have the flashbacks, they have the memories, the psychological impact. And some individuals, that's where also the panic attacks can be happening as well. So there are different The internal triggers are what that many people come in to be able to get help for, because sometimes the sensory triggers are not recognized as triggers for some people because they're not aware. But the internal triggers, people are aware that, hey, why am I having thoughts of that incident that happened many years ago? Or why am I having dreams and those dreams are coming? So many times individuals seek help because of these. And you have anniversaries as well, like the anniversary of a loved one passing away. That can become a trigger. Sometimes individuals will just be going on their wonderful day, and then all of a sudden they're having that feeling, uncomfortable feeling, but not knowing why. And when we start asking them, okay, tell me what happens around this time period. I usually do a 3-month period. And because within 3 months, that's usually the time frame I see a lot of impacts or the results of impacts from traumatic events. So I do a 3 months time frame, and within that 3-month time frame, okay, last week my parents passed away, or the anniversary of my parents passing away, or it was around that time that I went through my traumatic event, and it gives some specifications. So as we're going through and we're recognizing and understanding what the triggers are, we need to be able to recognize that people respond to their traumatic events differently. And if we need to be able to better understand, especially better understanding children, we need to be able to recognize that the way in which children respond to traumatic events is different from the way in which adults respond, and the way in which teenagers respond is different from the way children respond. We have to, because as we as human beings continue to grow, every so often I tell people it takes for a child, within 3 months it will be able to cause a major impact. For teenagers it will be 3 months, but the long lasting impact takes at least 2 years. So we need to be able to recognize what is happening within them and get them the help that they need. Because if a child is given certain behavioral challenges, it does not mean that they are being rude and being disrespectful. It means that they may have gone through a traumatic event, and you may not have recognized it as a traumatic event, but it is impacting them, and they are seeking help, and they're trying to tell you that they need the help, but they do not know how to say, hey, I'm needing help because I'm scared. I'm needing help because my heart rate is increasing and I do not know why. They can tell you that they dreamt of something bad and they do not know what it is. And you might say, okay, it's no big deal. Go back to bed. There was no one in your room, or you're gonna be okay. Or a child might be peeing in bed. And then we might say, okay, this is not normal. What is going on? Sometimes when we think of children urinating in the bed or urinating on them, we think of sexual assault. But it's not only sexual assault, it can also be traumatic event that that child may have gone through and is not processing that trauma accurately and will be in need of help to be able to process it. So as we are going through and going through this, let me just go back and let you guys know if any of you guys are in need of assistance. You want to be able to call us to be able to get some help. You can feel free to reach out to us at intake@holisticelevation.org, or you can call us at 302-278-0026. Once again, the number is 302-278-0026. Holistic Elevation, our services is not that of the traditional. As you can see, this is one of our rooms. This is called the forest room. So within here, every single room of ours is different. It reflects one of the areas that individuals will be able to use. Some individuals love the outdoors. Some individuals love the beach, or let me show you guys this one. So in here, this is the beach room. So you can see the sentry in here. And we can actually turn off the light and turn on the light. Bluetooth mode. And it will give you that sensory. So for clients with depression or psychotic features, we may have them relaxing here for a period of time. And it actually has provided major impact and support for people who are going through these challenges. Over here, let's go in here. Over here, we have the trauma room. And the trauma room itself, it is all about the superhero. Every one of them had to go through a traumatic event, but it was all about the support that they got, the ability for them to be able to tell their stories, and for them to be able to process their emotions. And then we have this room, which is still being painted. It is a unity room. The unity room is represented by the tree of life that was designed by me. And with this tree of life, we have the colors, it represents the company's colors. So we have where you can see in certain locations, you will see some gaps. These gaps represent the social determinants and the social challenges that we as individuals go through. And we have those gaps in different areas. But what happens, regardless of whether it is from us or from our parents or our community, we all impact the tree of life. So the feet are connected to the tree of life. So if there are environmental challenges that's happening, we can still impact a child that we don't know or a person we don't know, because there is a connection within all of what that we're doing. So for us, with mental health and offering complex trauma, we understand how we don't have to be connected to the traumatic event itself for it to be rippled into the impact it's causing to us. So this is a representation, and in here the three colors that we see is white, black, and gold. And it is because white and black are for the unity of the races, and gold is for royalty, that we all have royalty within us. So the four major rooms that we have here, which is the beach room, we have the trauma room, we have the unity room, and we have the forest room. And those rooms were created specifically because of the complex trauma and how we want each room to connect with individuals when they're going through traumatic events. Instead of just being within a space that is not connecting to their brainwave, we put them into a space that will help relax them and get them to the point of processing. Because the most important thing when it comes to PTSD and it comes to trauma is to be able to help with the processing of the traumatic event that will help into accepting the traumatic event. Because you don't have to accept the fact that, hey, that happened. It's not that but you're accepting that, hey, this has happened to me. There is a difference. So you want to be able to accept that this has happened to me. And once you accept that this has happened to me, then it creates the door of opening for you to be able to start processing, because now this has happened to me and this is how it impacted me. It got me angry, it got me mad. And as a result, I cannot have healthy relationships. As a result, I don't have a relationship with my parents, or I cannot be around people that is of whatsoever. These are the impacts, but I want to be able to get better because it has created insecurity within me. So being able to accept a trauma is the beginning of a healing process. And for us at Holistic Elevation, this is what we are focusing on, is how we can create that space to help individuals in processing their trauma. So today it was all about understanding PTSD and how PTSD itself can impact individuals and change, whether it is within a child, a teenager, an adult, even individuals like veterans and other individuals that have experiences COVID within this point of our life. Almost everyone has experienced some form of traumatic event, but it's all about how we process it. So once again, thank you all for listening and have a wonderful, wonderful night. If you need help, do not hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to offer all the help that you need. We do accept all forms of insurance, but reach out to us and we'll be able to help you in the process of getting the help that you need. Talk to you later. Bye bye.